Hello and welcome to the memory card. Now if you've seen my video on Uncharted 1, you'll know that I don't think the original release on the PS3 is all that great. And I don't think it aged all that well. It's still often looked back on really fondly, and people often say it was one of the best games on the PS3, but I don't think it holds up very well over time. But thankfully the series got a lot better with the sequels, and the second game in the series is often considered one of the best games on the PS3, and I can definitely see why. It's a marked improvement over the first game, and I'm looking forward to telling you all about Uncharted 2 Among Thieves for the PlayStation 3. Uncharted 2 Among Thieves was released in 2009 for the PlayStation 3, and it is a vast improvement in just about every single way over the first game. For one thing, I really like how the second game starts with Drake beat up in a train that's wrecked in the snowy mountains, and you don't really know what's caused the situation, but you're already interested in what's going on with how Drake got in the situation. And a lot of this game is told through flashbacks, which helps make the story a bit more interesting this time around, and I definitely like a lot of the characters that are introduced in this game. And not only is the story a lot better in this release, there's also a lot of improvements to the gameplay. For one thing, the combat is actually fun this time around because the combat is actually paced well this time around. Now there's still the issues with the shooting not being as responsive as it should be, but that pacing helps so much. Also, I enjoy the story a lot more this time around. There's some fun characters introduced this time around, like Chloe Fraser, and she's one of my favorite characters of the Uncharted series. She's just a really fun, interesting character, and she gets explored a bit more with each of the games, and she even is the main character of her own game in Uncharted The Lost Legacy on the PlayStation 4. Honestly, in some ways, I like Chloe more than Nathan, which is what made me excited for Lost Legacy. Nathan Drake this time around is also a lot more interesting and fun as a character to play as this time around. In the first game, he was just kind of relentlessly snarky and felt kind of one-dimensional to me. But this time around, he actually has moments of being heroic and actually caring about other people and seeming like it's more than just going after the treasure for his own selfish gain. And there are, again, some really fun interactions with different characters. Although, one weakness that this game has that I would say pretty much every Uncharted game has is that the villains are always kind of weak. Partially just because they never, one thing, feel all that threatening, considering that in gameplay, Nathan Drake can take so many bullets in combat and not die at all, and yet one person holding a gun at him in cutscenes is supposed to be super threatening, which creates a bit of dissonance between the gameplay and the cutscenes. And partially because of that, I never felt like Nathan Drake was all that threatened in any cutscenes, which kind of deflates the villains from the get-go. Also doesn't help that one of the main villains this time around, Flynn, is kind of a stereotypical action character of the old friend that ends up betraying you to be with the main villain. It's a thing that you've seen for years, dating all the way back to GoldenEye and before that. And this time it's not really done all that differently. That, and also Flynn's just kind of annoying throughout. He's never really all that threatening or competent. He just somehow stumbles into kind of one-upping you in certain situations. It's just not that great, honestly. It's not one of the strong suits of the game. One thing I do really love about Uncharted 2 is all the great variety in the locations. You start off on the snowy mountain, and then you go into one flashback where you're in like a more tropical area, and then you go off into rainforests and deserts and cities, and there's just a really nice variety, and there's some really fun set pieces throughout that make the story very interesting and the game fun to play through. It's kind of hard to get bored with this game. One criticism I do have of Uncharted 2, which is one I have for basically the entire series, is that the game feels too long. There's a lot of great set pieces throughout, and there's a lot of really fun, memorable moments, but it definitely drags by the end, and Definitely could have cut an hour or two there and have a really tight, fun experience. But as it stands, once it gets towards the end, you're just waiting for the end to finally happen. It just becomes kind of a slog as you're repeating the same kind of beats that you played in the first game and that you'll play in future games. These Uncharted games definitely benefited back in the day from having a couple years in between each game, so that way you could build up a desire to want to play these again and not perfectly remember everything that happened in the previous games, so you don't see the strings in the puppet show quite as much.
All right, let's take these guys out.
Something else that's really fun with the story in Uncharted 2 is that they do a good job of finding a sort of treasure in Lost City that's not really talked about quite as much because El Dorado and that treasure and the Fountain of Youth and all that is one of the most commonplace sort of Lost City things talked about. Like that and Atlantis are basically the two go to. But this time it goes to Shambhala or Shangri-La. And going into Tibet and all that is definitely a lot more interesting and new. There's also a lot of fun stuff thrown in there that calls into question stuff about how the laws of mysticism and science and all that works in the Uncharted franchise. It's definitely interesting and cool being able to go to different cultures in this game. That also helps make this a bit more interesting in comparison to the first game. Also, as hinted at in the beginning where you're on that wreck train, the train sequence in Uncharted 2 is a lot of fun, and it's definitely one of the highlights of the game, considering it's one of the main set pieces of the game. As with the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, one of the things that can get fatiguing about the Uncharted series is all the betrayals that happen. It happens all the time in this game especially, and it definitely gets frustrating over a point, but thankfully by the third act of the game, so to say, things calm down a bit and finally gets more straight ahead, which definitely helps combat the fatigue that happens just because of how long this game is. Now, even though I have been criticizing this game, I do still recommend Uncharted 2. Out of the PS3 Uncharted releases, it is by far the best one, and the one that I recommend the most over the others. The combat pacing is so much better. The villains, while it's hard to make them feel all that threatening, considering how many bullets Drake can take in gameplay, and also their motives are just kind of stock, that's still fun to go through all these set pieces and different locations, and it's fun having Chloe and Sully come back, and they're fun characters to be around, and Drake is a much better character this time around. He's a bit more well-rounded, and you get to see more of his past, and he just becomes a lot more compelling in this game. The Uncharted games, especially on the PS3, are very much summer blockbuster action flicks in game form, and they are very fun, just that the second one here is executed so much better. It's like the difference between Iron Man 2 and the first Avengers movie. Now, in a lot of ways, the beats are fairly predictable, but it is executed so well and is so much fun that it's hard to complain quite as much as the first time around. Also, it helps that you have some more interesting side characters this time around, like Chloe Fraser. She is a blast. It definitely sucks that in Uncharted 2 you don't get to learn as much about her, but thankfully she is developed further on in the other games. But thankfully, that performance from Claudia Black from Farscape and many other things brings that character to life in a very great way. One thing that you can say about the Uncharted games is that they all feature very, very solid voice acting. There's not a bad performance that I heard in any of these games. And they all sell their characters very, very well. Now, it might sound like I'm a bit critical of this game and the Uncharted series in general, but I do really enjoy these games. I don't quite think they're the pinnacle of game design like others say, but they are very fun rides to go through. Like I've said, they're basically, especially the original three games on the PS3, they're summer blockbusters. They're a lot of fun. They have some problems here and there, and there's not a whole lot there you've not seen before, but it's all done very well with a lot of polish and in a very fun package. It's pretty easy for me to recommend Uncharted 2 because I would definitely say of the three on the PlayStation 3, it is definitely the best of them. Although, whether you really need to play this on the PlayStation 3 is definitely debatable because all those 3 games are on the Uncharted collection on the PlayStation 4, and they play better, look better, sound better, and also I think control better, partially because they updated the controls for this release, and also I just think the DualShock 4 is a much better controller than the PlayStation 3 controller. But regardless of whether you get it on the PlayStation 3 or the 4, either way, it's a very fun game that I don't think you should pass up. But regardless, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on the memory card.